à tous, je m'appelle Rochelle, bienvenue sur ma chaîne. Today, I'm going to be sharing my favorite podcasts for learning French. Now, these podcasts range from beginner to intermediate, so they're a little bit of something for everyone. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the first one. The first one is I'm Polyglot, and this is hosted by Lionel. And the topics on this podcast include physical and mental health, being a vegan, and balancing money and happiness. I really enjoy his podcast, especially the one about the dangers of some medications. Very interesting. Now, in terms of transcripts, as of today, you have to have a club membership via his website to access the podcast transcript. So today is June 7th, 2022. So as of right now, you have to have the club membership to access the transcripts. Let's see, in terms of episodes, there are over 100 episodes in this podcast. So you definitely have a lot to choose from. What I like about this podcast is that it really helps you to learn French naturally. And he speaks in everyday natural French with a normal speed, which includes using slang and contractions. So that's totally helpful. All right, next up we have Français avec Pierre. And that's hosted by Pierre, and sometimes he hosts along with Naomi. So, some of the topics that are included in this podcast are French expressions, grammar rules, verb tenses, French history, lots of things, beaucoup de choses. So, if you want transcripts to this podcast, the podcasts are available on his blog, on his website. So go to his website, check out the blog, and you'll find the transcripts there. And in terms of number of episodes, there's around 50 episodes. So that's quite a bit. And Pierre is a total bundle of energy. I like to listen to his podcast in the morning as I get ready for work because it helps me to wake up. And he actually has 3 YouTube channels. 3. So one is called Français avec Pierre, Ooh la la lingua, and the third one is French avec nous that he co-hosts with his co-host Naomi. So lots to choose from there. All right, y'all. The next podcast is Little Talks in Slow French. Now this one is hosted by Negeza. I hope I'm saying that right. And some of the topics on this channel includes French politics and environmental topics, as well as French vocabulary and translations. So the transcripts for this podcast are free on her Patreon website. In terms of episodes, there's already over 80 episodes, which is really, really good. And so she speaks French primarily in the podcast, but she sometimes will use English to explain the text. And so she'll say something in French, and then she'll repeat it in English. Or if she's interviewing someone, then the interviewer may be speaking in French, and then she'll explain whatever the interviewer said in English. So I find that extremely helpful, and the podcast has like a really good pace to it. So that's really, really cool. All right. So up next, we have Oui Podcast. Now, this one is hosted by Leon, and there's a ton of topics that are discussed on this podcast, including topics like learning French for a holiday or vacation, sleep disorders, tackling difficult family relationships, and French expressions. So there's a lot. It's a wide range of interesting topics. So for the transcripts, they are available for free via his website after you sign up for the newsletter. So there's a little bit of work involved. Sign up for the newsletter and then you can get all of the transcripts. Now, there are nearly 600 episodes on this podcast. 600 episodes. That just blows my mind. That's a ton of episodes. So there's definitely plenty to listen to there. And this was actually one of the first French podcasts that I ever listened to. Also, Lyon sends out weekly newsletters in French, which really, really helps with my reading comprehension. The emails aren't super long, but I really enjoy reading them. All right, so the next podcast recommendation is InnerFrench, which is hosted by Hugo. So, some of the topics on this podcast are French history and politics. And I really, really enjoyed the video he did about the challenges of finding a place to live in France. I didn't realize it was so complicated. And in terms of transcripts, the transcripts are free via his website once you sign up for the newsletter. So sign up for the newsletter and then you'll get the transcripts. And there are over 100 episodes on this podcast. So there's definitely a lot to go back and listen to. And also, Hugo is a French language teacher. And I like his podcast because he speaks French in a slower than natural way, but not too slow. He's very easy to understand. And he also has a very well-known French YouTube channel. Okay, everybody. Next up, we have Duolingo French Podcast. And this is hosted by Gofin Mutuele. Oh, I hope I said that right. Probably not. Anyway, the Duolingo French Podcast has a ton of topics. And what I really like about them is that they tell stories through this podcast. And so the podcast can be from athletes, chocolate makers, musicians, painters, and authors. And I really like, there's a ton of episodes, there's a ton of stories, but the ones that I really, really like was the episode about A Song of Revolution, the episode A Tour of Black Paris, and Louisiane, My Love, which is about a man who becomes a night watchman at a prison. So many interesting stories, and I love that they're told by the person themselves. And the transcripts are available for free on the Duolingo podcast website. And there are over 80 episodes in this podcast. And this podcast just has a lot of fascinating true stories that are told in easy to follow French. And then there's some added context in English. So the storyteller will tell the story in French, and then the host will explain the story in English. So really cool. So helpful. All right. So next we have Learn French by Podcast. And this is hosted by a team of folks. It's hosted by Hugues, Amelie, Marie, and Xavier. And there's a ton of topics that include the benefit of waking up early, the opioid crisis, the struggles of going back to work, into the office after working remotely. I know that's been a struggle for a lot of people. Also, manufacturing environmentally friendly products. That's so interesting. And my favorite episode is the one about growing a garden, because I got to learn some gardening vocabulary, and I just love working in my greenhouse and working in my flower garden. So in terms of transcripts, I wasn't able to find any transcripts, but they do have lesson guides on their website. So those are helpful, and you can work those along with the episodes. So there are over 200 episodes in this podcast. And usually in the episode, it's a conversation between two people, and they will speak about a topic in French, and then they will break down what was said in English. So I really like that. It's so fun to just listen in on this conversation between two people and see how many words you can pick up. So last but certainly not least is Coffee Break French. And this is hosted by Marc and Pierre Benoit. And topics include French cinema, French culture, French food, French weather. And I'm actually currently re-listening to season 2 with Mark and Anna. And transcripts are available on their website via a paid premium membership. So, there's some extra steps there. Now, there are over 240 episodes in this podcast. Amazing. They have stuff for beginners, intermediate, advanced, everybody. It's so cool. And so if you are a beginner, I do suggest starting with season 1. And I listen to this podcast almost every morning before work. In fact, I made a separate video about coffee break French, and I will link it below or just put it in the end screen at the end of the video. So yeah, really, really great. And that podcast has been extremely helpful for me. So I will leave a link, or rather, I'll leave a list. I'll leave a list of all these podcasts in the description box below. So I'm not going to be leaving links to each podcast because these podcasts are found on many platforms, including Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So it really just depends on your preferred podcast service. You can just find them there. But like I said, I will leave a list of the podcasts in the description box below. So, as I mentioned before, please do keep in mind that the information about whether the podcast transcripts are free or paid may change in the future. You know how that can be sometimes. So, if you're watching this in the future and you go back and something is like paid now, and you're like, what happened? Or maybe it's free now. I don't know. But I wanted to give you all lots of options in terms of transcripts because I know for me, transcripts are super important. So, are there any podcasts that you listen to? Any French podcasts that you listen to? Did I forget any? Now, I will be making a part 2 to this video about more French podcasts that I like. So, no worries. But if you have some recommendations, definitely let me know in the comment section below. Alors, merci d'avoir regardé ma vidéo. S'il vous plaît, aimez et abonnez-vous. Cliquez sur la cloche de notification. À la prochaine!